on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here for our weekly course breakdown, this time for the Genesis Scottish Open, which is a brand new event both on the PGA Tour and DP World Tour schedules, a collaboration between the two tours where 75 of the brightest and best stars from each of the tours will be going head to head, and overall it's a star-studded field, plenty of the top 30 in the official World Golf rankings, but on top of that, also a star-studded venue. We've got the Renaissance Club, which isn't necessarily the oldest course or the most historic, but in terms of design, a Tom Doak masterpiece right alongside Muirfield there in Scotland is going to give these players the exact type of test they're looking for to get primed for St. Andrews next week. So going to be a great test, or at least taste, of what to expect in terms of links style golf courses, and in this video specifically going to get you prepared for exactly what to expect. So from playing conditions to what we've seen from the Renaissance Club over the years, we'll go hole by hole, breaking down exactly the type of shots that players will be faced with, but more importantly, we're also going to talk about the types of players that I expect to succeed this week. So my key stats for analysis, how I'm going to be identifying my top plays here, whether it's for fantasy or of course the outright perspective. So a lot to talk about here. Really excited to hop into this preview. Let's go ahead and hop right on in. Alrighty, let's break this thing down. So we've got ourselves the Renaissance Club in Berwick, Scotland, which is right next to the historic Muirfield Country Club, of course, the home of the Open in that rotunda. But more than that, this is a Tom Doak design, which is extremely important to note here. So let's start with that. He's much more known for Parkland, traditional American-style golf courses, than he is a Scottish link-style golf course. So this is his rendition or attempt at making one of those tracks. And while it is a pretty good application of a link style strategy, it definitely has its American quality. So let's start with that first and foremost. The off the tee play is not nearly as treacherous as we see at most link style golf courses. Most of them are a little bit closer to the shoreline. Here it's a little bit more spread out and also has Parkland style holes. So there's holes where they just cleared away forest to leave wide open room for this golf course, and as a result, the fairways don't have a ton of undulation to them. So part of the reason that makes a link style golf course difficult is you never have a flat lie. They're usually golf courses on sand dunes or similar type of terrain, and as a result, you can play the ball along the ground, you can run the ball up onto greens, and almost every single shot requires a lot of creativity. And while that's present for at least 3 or 4 holes around this track, the other 13 to 14, you're not going to be dealing with that at all, because a lot of them are up there in the former forest area here on this property, and a lot of them are more of target style golf where you have fairways that might be a little bit narrow, but the primary rough isn't all that much to worry about. And if you miss 30 to 40 yards wide here, you certainly get that link style, long fescue grass, a little bit of a rocky terrain. But if you hardly miss around the Renaissance Club, it much more resembles an American golf course. So you're going to hear the word links thrown a lot around this week. This is not really a link style setup. I mean, for 3 or 4 holes, it certainly is, and I'll point those out when we talk about it. But the other 13 to 14 holes, while they're not an American setup, it's more like a Royal St. George's than it is a St. Andrews than what we're going to get this year, where you can certainly keep it in play off the tee, hit these relatively large greens, and play target golf, right? Guys that are solid with the ball striking are able to shine at these type of venues, where at a St. Andrews, which is a lot more strategic, you also have to be a lot more well-rounded in terms of your short game, can expose some of those just ball striking, let's say trackman type of players. So let's understand it is a lot more favorable towards those trackman type of players this week than, let's say, what we're going to expect to see next week there at St. Andrews. So it's a par 71 setup, but a little bit unique there, where it has 5 par 3s, but also 4 par 5s. So plenty of scoring to be out there. Also to note that 2 of those par 5s are less than 160 yards. So going to be wedges at most for these players. And though it is 7,293 yards when tipped out, it usually plays closer to 7,200 yards. And that's not because of dog legs and whatnot. That's because of tee placements. A lot of them are just moved up. They don't use the full length of this golf course because they don't necessarily have to. Though it's short, it has plenty of hazards out there. Like I said, if you just miss a little bit off these fairways, let's say 10 to 20 yards, you're not going to be in all that much trouble. But if you miss wildly around here, there are sand dunes, there are long patches of fescue grass that can certainly gobble up your golf balls, or of course, cliffs, bluffs that go into the ocean, and your friendly little patch of water here and there. So it's not the easiest course off the tee, but as long as you are on top of your ball striking, you're certainly going to be able to take this place low because the greens are relatively large, about 6,000 square foot on average, but they play a little bit smaller than that. And the reason why I say that is Tom Doak, kind of known for his runoff areas. They usually play a little bit smaller than the actual yardage there because most of the fall off areas are on the sides of the greens. So if you're hitting it, in the outer 5 to 10% of the greens, a lot of times they're not actually going to hold the putting surface. So though they are relatively large, they play a little bit smaller, but they also play receptive. That's something we've seen over the first few iterations of this event. And they also tend to run close to 11 and a half on the stint meter. So nothing too outrageous there. The fairways, about tour average, at least to what we'd expect to see for a PGA Tour course, which means they're larger than what we're used to seeing for a links style setup. And that's something that I think makes this golf course easier. Why we've seen a winning score close to 22 under par around this venue. At a links style setup, that's kind of unheard of, right? Because typically there's a lot more Pinot off the tee, relatively small landing areas, a lot of fescue grass, native grass, rather than just rough around it. This golf course a little bit more American off the tee, where it kind of leans into that bomb and gouge approach rather than just trying to hit a bunch of fairways and play strategically like we're going to see at St. Andrews. So in terms of the fairways, the green size, everything like that, it's all a little bit less penal than what we're used to seeing over here. So, like I said before, you're going to hear the word links thrown around a whole lot. I don't really think it's going to play like a lot of links courses we've seen. Now, if you think about Pebble Beach is always talked about as a quote unquote golf links, right? I think that's like the perfect parallel where it's not a golf links course, but it has a lot of golf links qualities to it. This is that same type of venue. Now, the real kicker here is that it's in Scotland, right? So obviously it has that little bit of extra oomph to it because the surroundings give it that links style feel. But from the actual golf strategy perspective and from how you play it, a little bit different than most links golf courses. Like I said, a little bit more perceptive greens. You can play it along the ground here, but most players are going to sit absolutely sky high iron shots and take it in that perspective. They are fescue greens. The fairways also fescue grass. In the rough, like I said, you have about a 3 to 4 inch primary rough, but it's only about 10, maybe 15 yards wide. Outside of that, you have that long fescue grass scattered throughout rock outcroppings. All the sort of stuff that you would expect to see at a links style golf course. In terms of the weather, you're definitely going to see a weather impact if the wind kicks up. It's along the coastline, especially those 3 to 4 holes that I say have that true links style feel to them. So on those holes specifically, if it gets windy into that 20 to 30 mile an hour range, definitely something that could shoot scores upwards. But for the holes that are more protected by the trees, and there's not that many trees on property, but there are a few holes that are surrounded there, going to be a little bit less impactful. Alrighty, now for our hole-by-hole analysis. One thing to note here is the routing. Most likely going to be different than what we see here. At least over the years, they have started with hole number 3 as the actual hole number 1 for the Scottish Open. So we'll have to see if they default to their typical setup, which is starting with this 481-yard par 4. But in either circumstance, they will be playing these specific 18 holes. So let's go ahead and hop into it. First off with hole number 1, which is certainly not a handshake. It's 481 yards, and it really gives you a feel for this golf course. Holes are either going to be long, hard to reach into where you have a long iron in on approach, or they're going to be extremely short where you have a wedge in hand. There's only one hole I can think of off the top of my head where it's a medium length par 4, something where you might have like a 7 or an 8 iron in hand. So this gives you an idea of what to expect here, where even if you're one of the longer hitters on tour, you're going to have at least 175 yards into this green. And though it does taper off as you get down there, there's not a bunch of that long fescue rough here on the first hole. There's plenty of primary rough here to the left and right. So I do expect to see players take driver off the tee here. But if you're one of those guys who's definitely an accuracy first type of player, I'm going to see guys hitting 3-wood or hybrids off the tee. Just keep it short of that bunker, keep it in the short stuff, and then rely on your long iron game, because if you can't get it out there in hole number 1, you're going to have trouble for your entire round, because almost every single hole requires a shot of at least 175 yards into a green. So if we go to hole number 2, it's another long par 4. This time is 487 yards, another tee shot where it's a similar look, right? Relatively tight fairway, also a fairway bunker to the left side. More importantly, you're dealing with a long iron shot that gives you plenty of trouble. 188 yards. There's a few bunkers up either green side, which also add a little bit of difficulty, but you can see relatively large landing areas and usually not many bunkers. You can see there's one over here to the front left, but usually the area just in front of the green is going to be left open to encourage players to run balls up onto the green. And that's why I say it has a link style to it. But unlike most golf courses, right, this is a relatively large green here. There's not a ton of undulation on these greens, unlike most link style setups. And the fairways, they have this primary rough. Like, you wouldn't see this at most link style golf courses. You'd have this massive patch of fescue or something like that. And while there are patches of it, you can see over here to the right, towards the trees over here, you're starting to get into some of that native area and whatnot, where you certainly don't want to miss. You still have a pretty good buffer area, right? Where if you miss by, like I said, 10 to maybe 20, 25 yards, you're not going to have all that many problems. So hole number 2, though it is a difficult hole, as long as you're not wildly missing off the tee, you should be able to get it up at least greenside. And the reason why I think they play this course right before the Open Championship is look at this greenside, right? It has these pop bunkers, just like you see at St. Andrews or most of the Open Championship setups. Surrounds that are a little bit elevated, like 4 to 5 yards elevated, like you're going to see at most Open Championship courses. So it gives players a good chance to practice that part of their game. The approach play where you're running shots up, I think that's just a little bit of a novelty than anything, right? I think they're just trying to call it a link-style golf course and anything, because off the tee, it's certainly not what we're used to seeing from most of those setups. Hole 3 is really, I think this is going to be the opening hole. Like I said, at least over the last few years, this is the hole they've used as hole number 1. It's 600 yards. It's reachable by the longest players on tour in 2, but most probably laying up here because you definitely have to hit the short stuff to reach it in 2. You're going to have 270, maybe 280 yards into the front of this green, and the landing area for a layup is large. It's a little bit expanded here. They're trying to encourage players to take that more conservative approach, but if you can run a ball up here, and again, most of the areas in front of greens, this is another example of it, you have that area to run up balls, that is also encouraged. So if you're a great wood player, you have a 5 or 7 wood that you love to hit, might be something that you take a shot at there. So a hole for the long players for sure. And hole number 4 is an example of the opposite extreme, right? One of the shorter holes, a hole where if you hit the fairway, even with just a 3-wood or even an iron, you're still going to have a wedge in. So this is an example of just the polarization here, where you're not going to have many of those like 450-yard par 4s, where you're going to have a 7 or an 8 iron. Those players can almost forget those clubs this week, unless you're getting really out of position, having to pitch back into the fairway. Then you might have one of those clubs into those longer par 4s. But outside of that, it's going to be a lot of wedges and a lot of 5, 6 irons for a lot of these players. Hole 5 is a drivable par 4. It's 339 yards. It's drivable for pretty much every single player at the field. And I'd expect most to go for it, because if you see this little rock ball here, it's on the left side, goes in that direction, also to the right side here. You can get pinned up against it and it's in play, right? You're usually taking an unplayable if you get into that situation. So I'd expect most players to just go for it, kind of take this out of play to begin with. It's over there to the right as well, but it's a little bit more sporadic, not as consistent there. It's kind of eroded away over the years. So you go for the green, you hopefully get it on the surface or at least around it, and then get up and down for a birdie, I should say. Hole number 6 is a short par 3, just 148 yards, so a scoreable hole, one that most of the field is at least going to have a look at birdie on. Hole 7 is I would say, reachable par 5. It's just under 600 yards, but it plays significantly downhill, so you're going to get a little bit of a boost there. It also usually plays downwind, and like plenty of the holes here, you have plenty of room to run up shots. So, obviously if you're good with those running woods, hitting like a 5 or 7 wood up there, might be able to reach into pretty easily. Hole 8 is 507 yards, so another hole where you're hitting a long iron into a relatively large green. Over here, though, you'd start to see some of the bluffs come into play. You can see the ocean in the background. We're going to get to that part of the golf course here in a second, which is, first off, the most beautiful part of the golf course, but also where the true link style comes into play. To this point, you can see large landing areas. You still have plenty of rough to work with here where you're not in sand dunes or super long fescue grass. While it is a long hole, while it does have bunkering in front of it, this isn't nearly as difficult as it looks on paper. So it's not gettable, but it's not a brute like it looks like. This 201-yard par 3 is a little bit of a brute, though. While it has one of the easier greens on property, not the easiest, it is a super large green, right? They're going to put pin locations probably in the front left, back right, front right. There's not really all that much they're going to do with it. They're definitely not going to put it in the middle of this green. Relatively straightforward par 3, right? Just get it on the surface, 2-putt. Most players are going to be satisfied with the par. And now we get to the link style stuff. This is fun. So hole number 10 is one of his signature holes. It's a dogleg from right to left. It's one of the shorter par 4s here. So a hole that you're looking to get a wedge in hand, and you have a decision to be made off the tee. So you can see there's this bluff over here. It's like a 50-yard drop off. So obviously it's, lost ball. If you hit it down there, you're taking a drop wherever it crosses. And the more aggressive you are off the tee, you can see there's just 282 yards. That's like hitting an iron off the tee. I mean, you could push it down there to like flip range or even potentially onto the green. If you're somebody like a Rory McIlroy who's not playing this week, but if he was, maybe Scottie Scheffler who is, might be able to get it up there. So hole number 10, it's where you start to see that link style where those winds are going to be whipping from the left. You're going to have to start the ball over the penalty area. If you're somebody like a Scottie Scheffler, hope the wind brings it over and his fade brings it over there to the right. It's going to be an interesting hole to watch, that's for sure. Just to give you an idea of some of the targets, right? If somebody tries to push it up there, it's 307 yards. The longer hitters, right, that are really busting it out there, might get it out there 330. Might be able to run it up there close to the green, especially with how firm the swale tends to be at these Scottish golf courses. Hole 11 is another one of these quote-unquote link style holes where you have these sand dunes over here to the right, sand dunes to the left, and it's definitely terrain that you have to see on the green. So it's a little bit more undulated than most greens here, and of course you have this little rock wall here. So if you end up nuking it over the green, misclubbing, something like that, might have to take an unplayable from a shot against that rock wall. Hole 12 is another long par 4, so a hole where you're definitely going to have a long iron in hand. You hope to hit it in the fairway because on this part of the golf course, guys, you can see this rough is a lot more gnarly. When you start to see some of that like yellow texture to it, that's that fluffy long fescue grass. So this is, a fairway you don't want to miss. Luckily, it has a relatively large landing area, particularly if you lay up off the tee, which would set up a super long shot into the green. But a hole that you're looking to make par on. You're not really looking to get out of there with a birdie. It's one of the more difficult holes on property, but after that, you get a little bit of a gift, a 540-yard par 5. So should be reachable by pretty much every player, even if you end up missing the fairway. I think a lot of players will give it a look here. Another green that isn't protected by bunkers out front. So if you end up in that rough, have to run something up onto the green that is going to be in your arsenal. Hole 14 is the only on property. Again, this is the only one that I can think of where you might have like a 7-iron in hand because most players are going to be laying up off the tee, trying to keep it short of the bunkers here and leaving like 160 in. This is the only hole where you're going to have like 150 to 175, right? So, that proximity bucket is going to be extremely underutilized, but there's the one hole you might see it on. Hole 15 is 218 yards, so a relatively long par 3 here. It's got some bunkering to the right, but relatively large green surface too, right? So this is what I mean where it's not really a true link style golf course. You would never see this at a true Open Championship type of golf course. So a little bit less penal than most of those setups. Hole 16, the last of the par 5, so 560 yards, another reachable par 5. So while there's some brutes of holes on the back nine, you also have the 2 reachable par 5s. So a lot of scoring, a lot of volatility you're going to see there on the final round. Another hole where most of the field's reaching, but even if you don't, you have a large layup area and a birdie opportunity for the entire field. Hole 17, another long par 3, which you can tell, right? They're either 200-yard par 3s or they're like 150 yards, wedge range, something in that range. And another brute where you're just hoping to get on in a 2-putt. Relatively large green surface, extremely flat. In fact, the flattest green on property. So you could see some 40 to 50-foot putts made there. It's extremely flat. It used to be like a barn or something like that on property where they raised horses. And finally, hole 18, a long par 4, 481 yards. Plenty of bunkering here, so this could be a little bit dicey off the tee because the bunkers over here in Scotland tend to have riveted faces, so they're extremely steep. You can get right up against them, have to take an unplayable. And in a bunker, you can't take an unplayable, right, because it's a hazard. So you can just see absolute fucking madness out of those things. So get it in the fairway, hopefully get it on the green without any trouble. And most players are just going to survive with the par here, though it is scoreable, right? If you get it in the fairway, you're going to have just 170, 180 yards in, not like 200, 220 yards. You could make a birdie and really stir things up there on a Sunday. All right, now that we've seen the golf course, let's go ahead and talk about the key stats I'm using this week to identify my top plays. At number 1, we have shots gained approach, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. It's by far the most important and most consistent stat from week to week on the PGA Tour. And around this venue, you're going to have a lot of long iron shots. We just showed you that. Plenty of 170 to 180 yard shots. I mean, at least 7 to 8 that I can think of, and plenty of 200 to 250 yard approaches you're going to have on those par 5s. So overall, the players that are best in those categories are going to get a bump, but also in those short iron ranges. Like I also showed you, plenty of holes where you're going to have 120 yards or less in. So players that excel in both categories are going to funnel their way towards the top of my models. At number 2, we have birdie or better percentage. And while we have seen this course play difficult 1 out of the 3 times we've played here, the other 2 times it was at 20 under par or better in terms of scoring. And frankly, the weather wasn't all that great. The year where scoring was a little bit lower. I expect this to be a birdie fest. They don't want to punish these players before heading to St. Andrews. And like I said, it resembles a lot more American course than it does a usual link style setup here in Scotland. So expect to see plenty of low scores. The par 5s are extremely gettable at 2. 2 of the par 3s are going to be a wedge at most. And you also have a drivable par 4 and 2 par 4s with sub 100 yard approaches, especially for the longest players on tour. So you're looking at 7, maybe even 8. I don't want to say gimme birdie looks, but holes where you realistically want to have 10 to maybe 15 feet at most for birdie. So I expect a winning score close to maybe 20 to 25 under par. In those circumstances, I am almost always looking at birdie or better percentage. It's also important for fantasy scoring, which of course a lot of you are here for that reason. And lastly, we have shots gained off the tee, which is important at a longer golf course. And while this isn't a bomb and gouge type of affair, like I said, Tom Doak designs tend to lend themselves towards that approach because you have these large greens. Mostly he has undulated greens, but here at this setup, the greens don't have that much spruce to them. They're not really crazy like most of his golf courses. So if you can just get it on the surfaces here, keep it in the fairway, I mean, you're going to be able to spin the ball, really get it close to these pin locations. And even if you don't, right, you still have relatively flat surfaces where guys are going to make some of those 20 to 30 foot putts. So for me, one of the key differentiators is just going to be shots gained off the tee, right? How many times are you going to set yourself up for success? Because if there is one thing that can go awry on that back 9, when you get to some of those link style holes, it's getting into those sand dunes. Off of hole number 10, on the left side, absolute death if you're over there. Hole number 9, or I believe it's hole number 8, death to the left side there in the sand dunes. There are plenty of ticking time bombs out there, but most of them are off the tee. I mean, into greens like you saw, plenty of surrounds where you have those pop bunkers, but, they can deal with those, right? You might have 1 or 2 that go awry over a week, but a lot of that comes down to luck. The real issues that can be self-inflicted are off the tee. So it's something that I am looking at, but other key stats that will be included this week are shots gained putting, which is always important at a birdie fest, kind of like birdie or better percentage. I'm looking at shots gained at the Renaissance Club, which we don't have actual shots gained metrics, but I'm using a pseudo metric where I'm taking a look at finishing position and, based on where they finished, I'm giving them a little bit of a boost in my modeling, right? So the guys that have experience here will get a little bit of a boost. And even if it's not the best experience, if they've just been making cuts, like finishing a 30th or 40th place, they're going to get a boost there because they have that familiarity. And while it's obviously not going to be a massive boost in my poll at golf courses that are relatively new to the Rotunda, I think that could be of use. I mean, there's not a lot of analysis out there on it. I'm sure the companies that are doing a lot of the strategic work for these players, the analytics, what decisions to make off the tee, a lot of that's not very robust for this course at this point. So the guys that have been here that have done a lot of that analysis themselves, I would expect to see an advantage even if they haven't finished in the top 10, top 20. Also taking a look at shots gained at Open Championships, though it's not a true link style setup, I think there's some qualities like running balls onto the greens that are at least somewhat familiar between the two setups. We also have shots gained at link setups, for that same reason. I'm taking a look at those. 3-putt avoidance with some of the larger greens I think might come into play. Driving distance, so on top of just shots gained off the tee, I do think, like I said, it's a little bit more of a bomber's approach rather than a accuracy approach this week. Par 5 scoring and par 3 scoring round out the bunch here. Alright, guys, that's all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to make your lineups, do your own modeling, or place your outright bets. But in either way, guys, really looking forward to this week. We'll also have some content out for the Barbasol Championship, so look forward to that. Obviously is the alternate field, so majority of the focus will be here on the Genesis Scottish Open, but not going to completely neglect that side. There should be quite an edge to be had with people obviously focusing more on the Scottish. If you choose to focus more on the Barbasol, you're probably going to win quite a bit of money this week. So it will be something that I'm touching on. But as per usual, going to give you the full slate of content here for the Scottish Open. So core picks from the DFS side. We will have a weekly live stream, both for the betting perspective and the DFS perspective. It'll be the betting stream 7 p.m. on Tuesday night. And of course, our weekly DFS live stream going to be 7 p.m. Eastern time there on Wednesday evening. So you won't want to miss any of that. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of that when it goes live. And also, before you hop on out of here, guys, first off, let me know what you think the winning score is going to be this week. Like I said, I think it's going to be a birdie fest, particularly if the weather cooperates. So I'm going to take 23 under par, but make sure you go ahead and comment down below what you're taking. And of course, make sure you go ahead and smash that like button. It lets me know that you're enjoying this content, want to see even more of it in the future, but even more importantly, it also helps me with growing the channel, right? Growing this business, this brand that I'm looking to build here, and gets the content out there to more people. The YouTube algorithm sees you guys liking the videos, watching the whole way through, and rewards it with, spitting it out there to more people. So make sure you go ahead and do that if you haven't already too. I appreciate all the support here, guys. Like I said, best of luck with all of your lineups and all of your outright bets, and let's get this cash, fellas.